Welcome to a fireside reading of A Passage to India by E.M. Forster. Chapter 4. The collector kept his word. Next day he issued invitation cards to numerous Indian gentlemen in the neighborhood, stating that he would be at home in the garden of the club between the hours of 5 and 7 on the following Tuesday. Also that Mrs. Turton would be glad to receive any ladies of their families who were out of purdah. His action caused much excitement and was discussed in several worlds. "It is owing to orders from the LG, was Mahmud Ali's explanation. "Turton would never do this unless compelled. Those high officials are different. They sympathize. The Viceroy sympathizes. They would have us treated properly. But they come too seldom and live too far away. Meanwhile, it is easy to sympathize at a distance," said an old gentleman with a beard. "I value more the kind word that is spoken close to my ear. Mr. Turton has spoken it from whatever cause. He speaks, we hear. I do not see why we need discuss it further." Quotations followed from the Quran. "We have not all your sweet nature, Nawab Bahadur, nor your learning. The lieutenant governor may be my very good friend, but I give him no trouble. How do you do, Nawab Bahadur?" "Quite well, thank you, Sir Gilbert. How are you?" "And all is over. But I can be a thorn in Mr. Turton's flesh, and if he asks me, I accept the invitation. I shall come in from Dilkusha especially, though I have to postpone other business." "You will make yourself cheap," suddenly said a little black man. There was a stir of disapproval. Who was this ill-bred upstart that he should criticize the leading Mohammedan landowner of the district? Mahmud Ali, though sharing his opinion, felt bound to oppose it. "Mr. Ramchand," he said, swaying forward stiffly with his hands on his hips. "Mr. Mahmud Ali, Mr. Ramchand, the Nawab Bahadur can decide what is cheap without our valuation, I think." "I do not expect I shall make myself cheap," said the Nawab Bahadur to Mr. Ramchand, speaking very pleasantly, for he was aware that the man had been impolite, and he desired to shield him from the consequences. It had passed through his mind to reply, "I expect I shall make myself cheap," but he rejected this as the less courteous alternative. "I do not see why we should make ourselves cheap. The invitation is worded very graciously." Feeling that he could not further decrease the social gulf between himself and his auditors, he sent his eldest grandson, who was in attendance on him, to fetch his car. When it came, he repeated all that he had said before, though at greater length, ending up with, "Till Tuesday, then, gentlemen all, when I hope we may meet in the flower gardens of the club." This opinion carried great weight. The Nawab Bahadur was a big proprietor and a philanthropist, a man of benevolence and decision. His character among all the communities in the province stood high. He was a straightforward enemy and a staunch friend, and his hospitality was proverbial. "Give, do not lend. After death, who will thank you?" was his favorite remark. He held it a disgrace to die rich. When such a man was prepared to motor 25 miles to shake the collector's hand, the entertainment took another aspect. For he was not like some eminent men who give out that they will come and then fail at the last moment, leaving the small fry floundering. if he said he would come, he would come. He would never deceive his supporters. The gentlemen whom he had lectured now urged one another to attend the party, although convinced at heart that his advice was unsound. He had spoken in the little room near the courts, where the pleaders waited for clients. Clients waiting for pleaders sat in the dust outside. These had not received a card from Mr. Turton, and there were circles even beyond these, people who wore nothing but a loincloth, people who wore not even that and spent their lives in knocking two sticks together before a scarlet doll, humanity grading and drifting beyond the educated vision, until no earthly invitation can embrace it. All invitations must proceed from heaven, perhaps. Perhaps it is futile for men to initiate their own unity. They do but widen the gulfs between them by the attempt. So, at all events, thought old Mr. Graysford and young Mr. Sawley, the devoted missionaries who lived out beyond the slaughterhouses, always travelled third on the railways and never came up to the club. In our Father's house are many mansions, they taught, and there alone will the incompatible multitudes of mankind be welcomed and soothed. Not one shall be turned away by the servants on that veranda, be he black or white. Not one shall be kept standing who approaches with a loving heart. And why should the divine hospitality cease here? Consider with all reverence the monkeys. May there not be a mansion for the monkeys also? Old Mr. Graysford said, no. But young Mr. Sawley, who was advanced, said, yes. He saw no reason why monkeys should not have their collateral share of bliss, and he had sympathetic discussions about them with his Hindu friends. And the jackals? Jackals were indeed less to Mr. Sawley's mind, but he admitted that the mercy of God, being infinite, may well embrace all mammals. And the wasps? He became uneasy during the descent to wasps and was apt to change the conversation. And oranges, cactuses, crystals, and mud? And the bacteria inside, Mr. Sawley? No, this is going too far. We must exclude someone from our gathering, or we shall be left with nothing. Chapter 5, Part 1. The bridge party was not a success. At least it was not what Mrs. Moore and Miss Quested were accustomed to consider a successful party. They arrived early, since it was given in their honor, but most of the Indian guests had arrived even earlier and stood massed at the farther side of the tennis lawns, doing nothing. "It is only just 5, said Mrs. Turton. "My husband will be up from his office in a moment and start the thing. I have no idea what we have to do. It's the first time we've ever given a party like this at the club. Mr. Hislop, when I'm dead and gone, will you give parties like this? It's enough to make the old type of Burra Sahib turn in his grave." Ronnie laughed deferentially. "You wanted something not picturesque, and we've provided it," he remarked to Miss Quested. "What do you think of the Aryan brother in a topi and spats?" Neither she nor his mother answered. They were gazing rather sadly over the tennis lawn. No, it was not picturesque. The East, abandoning its secular magnificence, was descending into a valley whose farther side no man can see. The great point to remember is that no one who's here matters. Those who matter don't come. Isn't that so, Mrs. Turton? "Absolutely true," said the great lady, leaning back. She was saving herself up, as she called it, not for anything that would happen that afternoon or even that week, but for some vague future occasion when a high official might come along and tax her social strength. Most of her public appearances were marked by this air of reserve. Assured of her approbation, Ronnie continued, "The educated Indians will be no good to us if there's a row. It's simply not worthwhile conciliating them. That's why they don't matter. Most of the people you see are seditious at heart, and the rest had run squealing. The cultivator, he's another story. The Pathan, he's a man, if you like, but these people don't imagine they're India." He pointed to the dusky line beyond the court, and here and there it flashed a pince-nez or shuffled a shoe, as if aware that he was despising it. European costume had lighted like a leprosy. Few had yielded entirely, but none were untouched. There was a silence when he had finished speaking on both sides of the court. At least more ladies joined the English group, but their words seemed to die as soon as uttered. Some kites hovered overhead. Impartial over the kites passed the mass of a vulture, and with an impartiality exceeding all, the sky, not deeply coloured, but translucent, poured light from its whole circumference. It seemed unlikely that the series stopped here. Beyond the sky must not there be something that overarches all skies, more impartial even than they, beyond which again? They spoke of Cousin Kate. They had tried to reproduce their own attitude to life upon the stage and to dress up as the middle-class English people they actually were. Next year they would do Quality Street or the Yeoman of the Guard. Save for this annual incursion, they left literature alone. The men had no time for it. The women did nothing that they could not share with the men. Their ignorance of the arts was notable, and they lost no opportunity of proclaiming it to one another. It was the public school attitude flourishing more vigorously than it can yet hope to do in England. If Indians were shop, the arts were bad form, and Ronnie had repressed his mother when she inquired after his viola. A viola was almost a demerit, and certainly not the sort of instrument one mentioned in public. She noticed now how tolerant and conventional his judgments had become. When they had seen Cousin Kate in London together in the past, he had scorned it. Now he pretended that it was a good play, in order to hurt nobody's feelings. An unkind notice had appeared in the local paper, the sort of thing no white man could have written, as Mrs. Leslie said. The play was praised, to be sure, and so were the stage management and the performance as a whole, but the notice contained the following sentence: "Miss Derrick, though she charmingly looked her part, lacked the necessary experience and occasionally forgot her words." This tiny breath of genuine criticism had given deep offence, not indeed to Miss Derrick, who was as hard as nails, but to her friends. Miss Derrick did not belong to Chandrapur. She was stopping for a fortnight with the McBrides, the police people, and she had been so good as to fill up a gap in the cast at the last moment. A nice impression of local hospitality she would carry away with her. "To work, Mary, to work," cried the collector, touching his wife on the shoulder with a switch. Mrs. Turton got up awkwardly. "What do you want me to do? Oh, those Purdo women. I never thought any would come, oh dear." A little group of Indian ladies had been gathering in a third quarter of the grounds, near a rustic summer house, in which the more timid of them had already taken refuge. The rest stood with their backs to the company and their faces pressed into a bank of shrubs. At a little distance stood their male relatives, watching the venture. The sight was significant, an island bared by the turning tide and bound to grow. "I consider they ought to come over to me." Come along, Mary, get it over. I refuse to shake hands with any of the men, unless it has to be the Nawab Bahadur. Whom have we so far? He glanced along the line. Much as one expected. We know why he's here, I think, over that contract, and he wants to get the right side of me for Mahoraman. And he's the astrologer who wants to dodge the municipal building regulations, and he's that Parsi, and he's... Hello, there he goes, smash into our hollyhocks. Pulled the left rein when he meant the right. All as usual. They ought never to have been allowed to drive in. It's so bad for them, said Mrs. Turton, who had at last begun her progress to the summer house, accompanied by Mrs. Moore, Miss Quested, and a terrier. Why they come at all, I don't know. They hate it as much as we do. Talk to Mrs. McBride. Her husband made her give purdah parties until she struck. This isn't a purdah party, corrected Miss Quested. Oh, really? Was the haughty rejoinder. Do kindly tell us who these ladies are, asked Mrs. Moore. You're superior to them. Anyway, don't forget that. You're superior to everyone in India, except one or two of the Ranis, and they're on an equality. Advancing, she shook hands with the group and said a few words of welcome in Urdu. She had learnt the lingo, but only to speak to her servants, so she knew none of the politer forms, and of the verbs only the imperative mode. As soon as her speech was over, she inquired of her companions, Is that what you wanted? Please tell these ladies that I wish we could speak their language, but we have only just come to their country. Perhaps we speak yours a little, one of the ladies said. Why, fancy, she understands, said Mrs. Turton. Eastbourne, Piccadilly, Hyde Park Corner, said another of the ladies. Oh, yes, they're English-speaking. But now we can talk. How delightful, cried Adela, her face lighting up. She knows Paris also, called one of the onlookers. They pass Paris on the way, no doubt, said Mrs. Turton, as if she was describing the movement of migratory birds. Her manner had grown more distant since she had discovered that some of the group was westernized and might apply her own standards to her. The shorter lady, she is my wife. She is Mrs. Bhattacharya, the onlooker explained. The taller lady, she is my sister. She is Mrs. Das. The shorter and the taller ladies both adjusted their saris and smiled. There was a curious uncertainty about their gestures, as if they sought for a new formula which neither East nor West could provide. When Mrs. Bhattacharya's husband spoke, she turned away from him, but she did not mind seeing the other men. Indeed, all the ladies were uncertain, cowering, recovering, giggling, making tiny gestures of atonement or despair at all that was said, and alternately fondling the terrier or shrinking from him. Miss Quested now had her desired opportunity. Friendly Indians were before her, and she tried to make them talk, but she failed. She strove in vain against the echoing walls of their civility. Whatever she said produced a murmur of deprecation, varying into a murmur of concern when she dropped her pocket handkerchief. She tried doing nothing to see what that produced, and they, too, did nothing. Mrs. Moore was equally unsuccessful. Mrs. Turton waited for them with a detached expression. She had known what nonsense it all was from the first. When they took their leave, Mrs. Moore had an impulse and said to Mrs. Bhattacharya, whose face she liked, I wonder whether you would allow us to call on you some day. When? She replied, inclining charmingly. Whenever is convenient. All days are convenient. Thursday? Most certainly. We shall enjoy it greatly. It would be a real pleasure. What about the time? All hours. Tell us which you would prefer. We're quite strangers to your country. We don't know when you have visitors, said Miss Quested. Mrs. Bhattacharya seemed not to know either. Her gesture implied that she had known, since Thursdays began, that English ladies would come to see her on one of them, and so always stayed in. Everything pleased her, nothing surprised. She added, "We leave for Calcutta today." "Oh, do you?" said Adela, not at first seeing the implication. Then she cried, "Oh, but if you do, we shall find you gone." Mrs. Bhattacharya did not dispute it, but her husband called from the distance, "Yes, yes, you come to us Thursday." "But you'll be in Calcutta." "No, no, we shall not." He said something swiftly to his wife in Bengali. "We expect you Thursday." "Thursday," the woman echoed. "You can't have done such a dreadful thing as to put it off going for our sake?" exclaimed Mrs. Moore. "No, of course not. We are not such people." He was laughing. "I believe that you have. Oh, please, it distresses me beyond words." Everyone was laughing now, but with no suggestion that they had blundered. A shapeless discussion occurred, during which Mrs. Turton retired, smiling to herself. The upshot was that they were to come Thursday, but early in the morning, so as to wreck the Bhattacharya plans as little as possible, and Mr. Bhattacharya would send his carriage to fetch them, with servants to point out the way. Did he know where they lived? Yes, of course he knew. He knew everything, and he laughed again. They left among a flutter of compliments and smiles, and 3 ladies, who had hitherto taken no part in the reception, suddenly shot out of the summer house like exquisitely coloured swallows and salaamed them. We will read the second part of Chapter 5 tomorrow, same time and place, 5 Pacific at Fireside Reading on Instagram, live, and all the chapters uploaded to the YouTube channel Fireside Reading. Then Sunday and Monday, I will not be reading. Very exciting time for, you guessed it, Dancing with the Stars. And for those of you who don't know, my wife is on Dancing with the Stars this season. And it's a very, very tough day to be dancing. Your votes would be greatly appreciated. All right, until I see you all again tomorrow at the same time and place, everyone, please stay very, very well. Good night.